The barn was almost silent. The kind of silence that felt heavy, as though the air itself had forgotten how to move. Dust hung suspended in narrow beams of sunlight that slipped through the cracks in the roof, turning each ray into a slow dance of golden haze. The smell of old hay mixed with something sour, the scent of grain left too long, of time and neglect. Somewhere above, pigeons shifted on the rafters, their wings stirring a soft murmur that quickly faded. Then, from the shadows, came a fragile sound. A single, trembling bleat. Mira turned toward it first, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Against the far wall, half hidden beneath a scatter of straw, a small goat lifted its head. Its fur was tangled and rough, its eyes half closed with exhaustion. Bones pressed sharply beneath thin skin, each breath shallow and uncertain. It did not move when the rescuers approached, only watched, as though unsure if this was safety or something else. They had come in response to a call, a report of animals left behind on an abandoned farm. But the stillness that greeted them was heavier than they'd expected. No voices, no machinery, only the soft rhythm of faint breathing. Mira knelt down, her knees sinking into the cold earth. Slowly, she extended a hand, brushing the goat's coat with the back of her fingers. The animal flinched, but did not pull away. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're here now." Her voice barely rose above the rustle of hay, but it carried something quiet and steady, a sound of human presence without demand. The goat's nostrils quivered, its eyes flicked toward her for a moment, then closed again. Not in surrender, but in the fragile trust of something too tired to resist. Around them, the barn revealed its story in fragments. Empty feed bins. A rope frayed and broken. The faint tracks of hooves pressed into hardened mud. 2 hens perched beneath a fallen beam, feathers dulled by dust and neglect. They blinked slowly, their small bodies rising and falling in unison. A rusted bucket lay on its side, a thin crust of ice at the bottom where rain had seeped through the roof. Mira stood and called softly to the others. "Over here." Her words were brief, but carried the weight of what she'd seen. The team moved carefully through the dim light, setting down bags and boxes. No one spoke louder than necessary. Each sound, the click of a latch, the soft scrape of boots, seemed to disturb the fragile stillness. Outside, the day was pale and cold. The team worked quickly but quietly, bringing in supplies. Hay bales wrapped in twine, buckets of water, folded blankets. The wind carried the smell of rain on the horizon. When the barn doors opened wider, the light shifted across the floor, catching on broken boards and the shapes of life stirring beneath them. Inside, Mira returned to the goat. It had managed to raise its head a little higher, drawn by the scent of fresh water now filling a shallow pan. Its tongue moved slowly, uncertainly, before it began to drink. Each swallow sounded small but deliberate, as if the act itself was a memory being relearned. The hens stepped down from their perch, testing the straw beneath their feet. One pecked at a stray grain, and the faint sound of the motion seemed to ripple through the air, the sound of life, tentative but real. The rescuers moved among them with practiced calm. They didn't rush. They replaced hay, cleared debris, checked for injuries. The goat's hooves were overgrown, its legs trembling with weakness, but it stood long enough to reach a handful of fresh feed. Mira stayed beside it, her movements slow and predictable. Every few minutes, she murmured a word or two, more to steady her own breathing than to reassure the animal. As the hours passed, the barn began to change. The smell of decay softened beneath the scent of hay. The sound of footsteps, of water being poured, of animals stirring, all of it began to fill the spaces where silence had once lived. The pigeons above settled again, their faint coos blending into the rhythm of quiet recovery. By evening, the sun's last light slipped through the cracks in the boards, painting the air in muted gold. The goat lay curled beside a mound of straw, breathing evenly now. The hens had nestled close together, eyes closed in rest. Mira stood at the doorway, her silhouette outlined against the fading light. She looked once more at the still forms inside, then closed the door partway to keep the wind from creeping in. The barn had not yet healed. But within its worn walls, the quiet had changed. No longer the silence of absence, but the soft, steady hush of life beginning again. Beyond the barn, the land stretched wide and pale beneath a colorless sky. The grass was brittle underfoot, snapping softly with every step the rescuers took. Rusted fences leaned at odd angles, their wires coiled like forgotten scars. A few trees stood along the edge of the property, bare-limbed and still. The team moved quietly, their voices low, calling into the silence that seemed to listen more than it answered. Every word drifted away, swallowed by distance. Then, faint and uneven, a sound came back, a hollow thud, followed by a slow exhale. It came from the direction of an old shed, half collapsed beneath the weight of its own roof. Mira was the first to approach. The doorway sagged, the air inside thick with the scent of rot and hay turned to dust. For a moment, she could see nothing but shadow. Then her eyes adjusted, and the shape revealed itself, a mare, motionless except for the tremor of her sides as she breathed. Her coat, once chestnut, had dulled to a tired gray, streaked with dirt and age. She turned her head slightly as the rescuers stepped closer, her eyes reflecting light like pieces of amber beneath soot. There was no panic in them, only the watchful stillness of an animal that had waited too long to be afraid. The halter on her face hung loose, frayed at the edges. Her mane was tangled with straw, her tail thin and uneven. She shifted her weight, hooves scraping against the concrete floor, and a soft grunt escaped her. Beneath her ribs, every breath seemed to draw effort. Yet she stood, fragile but unbroken. One of the rescuers exhaled quietly. "She's been waiting," he murmured, the words falling heavy into the cold air. A pen where wire fencing had collapsed inward. There, half hidden in shadow, a pig lay on its side. The ground beneath it was scored with shallow grooves where it had tried to stand. A thin streak of blood marked one hind leg, caught in twisted wire that had cut deep into the skin. Its body rose and fell rapidly, each breath short and labored. Mira moved closer, crouching down until she was level with its eyes. "Easy now," she whispered. "Easy." The animal tensed, then stilled, the whites of its eyes visible beneath the grime. She slid her hand carefully along the wire, working it loose until it fell away. The wound was raw but cleanable, not deep enough to take life, but deep enough to show how close it had come. A second rescuer brought bandages, water, and a bucket of feed. Together, they worked in silence, the only sounds the slow rhythm of breathing and the clink of metal tools. The smell of decay lingered, a mixture of damp wood, spoiled hay, and time gone stale. But beneath it, there was something new now, the scent of grain, the faint trace of antiseptic, the earthy breath of animals returning to life. Everywhere they looked, the same story unfolded, feathers scattered but not abandoned, hoofprints pressed into hardened mud, nests hidden beneath rusted sheets of tin. Each detail was a testament not only to neglect but to endurance. As afternoon deepened toward dusk, the team guided the mare from the shed, step by step, her hooves leaving clear marks in the dirt. The pig was lifted gently onto a blanket, its head resting against Myra's knee. Nearby, the goats and hens had begun to stir again, drawn by the sound of movement and care. The property, once silent and cold, began to hum with small noises, breathing, shifting, the faint rustle of life remembering itself. By the time the sun dipped low, the rescuers had gathered the animals together near the barn. They moved among them slowly, offering water, spreading fresh straw, checking each wound and mark. The mare stood near the fence, her head lowered, eyes half closed. The pig slept beside her, chest rising in a calm rhythm. The hens settled close, their feathers puffed against the cooling air. Mira stood at the edge of it all, her hands still streaked with dirt, watching the scene take shape in the dim light. The farm was still broken, its fences bent, its past heavy in the soil. But as night fell, the quiet no longer felt empty. It was the sound of breath, uneven but alive, weaving its way through the ruins like the first trace of hope finding its place again. Dawn unfolded quietly over the broken fields, soft and colorless at first, then brushed with a faint warmth that touched the edges of frost on the ground. The rescuers moved slowly through the pale light, their breaths visible in the cold air as they readied the trailers. Metal doors creaked softly, blankets were laid out, and buckets of water were set inside. Every motion was deliberate, unhurried. The animals, standing in the chill of morning, watched in silence. There was no noise here but the sound of feet on gravel, the rustle of hay, the low hum of an engine waiting to begin. The mare stood apart from the others, her body stiff, the line of her spine visible beneath the faded coat. She blinked at the ramp before her, nostrils widening at the unfamiliar scent of rubber and oil. Her hooves scraped once against the frozen dirt, hesitation written in every slow movement. Mira approached from the side, her voice calm, steady. "It's safe," she murmured. "Let's go home." The mare flicked one ear, then the other. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with a tremor that ran the length of her frame, she took one step forward, then another. The ramp groaned under her weight, but she didn't stop. By the time she was inside, the first touch of sunlight had reached her back. One by one, the others followed. The small goat was lifted gently into the next trailer, its legs weak but still pressing against the rescuer's hands. The wounded pig, now bandaged and calm, was eased onto a bed of straw. Hens were gathered into a crate, their soft murmurs weaving through the quiet like the echo of reassurance. When all were settled, the doors closed softly, and the convoy began to move. The road unspooled before them, long and narrow between winter trees. Mist rose from the low fields, curling against the fences and drifting across the path like breath. Inside the trailers, the rhythm of travel began, the soft shifting of hooves, the slow exhale of animals leaning into the motion. The goat pressed close to the pig for warmth, its head resting against the larger animal's flank. The mare balanced herself with quiet precision, her ears flicking at every turn. None of them made more sound than necessary. The space was filled with the fragile harmony of survival. The rescuers drove in near silence. Words felt unnecessary, even intrusive. Each of them watched the road, the morning spreading wider as the sky began to open. The fields gave way to open plain, to clusters of distant trees, to the faint shimmer of a frozen stream. Behind them, the trailers carried not just the animals, but the weight of everything that had been endured. Between the creak of the wheels and the hum of the engine, there was a sense of something mending, too quiet to name. A few hours in, they stopped beside a stretch of pasture bordered by thin frost. Mira stepped out first, the cold air stinging her cheeks. She approached the nearest trailer and opened the small window in the side. The mare stood close, eyes soft but alert. Mira reached in and brushed her fingers gently against the horse's neck. The animal flinched, then relaxed, nostrils flaring as if recognizing the scent from the barn, the same quiet presence that had brought food, warmth, safety. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it carried the delicate truth of trust beginning to form, the kind that can't be forced, only earned in silence. They continued soon after. The sun climbed higher, turning the frost to dew. The smell of hay mixed with the faint metallic tang of air through the vents. Each mile seemed to pull the weight of distance away, the old fear left behind, the memory of emptiness fading beneath the steady sound of travel. The mare began to lower her head as the motion steadied. The goat shifted against the pig, no longer trembling. Even the hens had quieted completely, as if listening to the hum of the road. By midday, the world had changed around them. The trees were greener, the air warmer, the sky opening into pale blue. The rescuers drove on, eyes steady on the horizon. Inside the trailers, the animals rested against the rhythm of the journey, no longer waiting for rescue, but moving toward it. And with each passing mile, the distance between what was lost and what could be found grew smaller, until the road itself seemed to breathe with them, carrying everything forward into a new beginning. When the gates of the sanctuary opened, morning unfolded like a breath released after a long silence. The air was soft, carrying the scent of damp grass and new hay. Sunlight spread gently across the paddocks, slipping through the leaves and brushing the ground with warmth. The convoy came to a stop beside an open field bordered by clean fences and shaded trees. For the first time in many days, there was no sound of struggle, no echo of neglect, only the hum of quiet life waiting to welcome what was left of the broken and the brave. The doors of the first trailer opened with a low creak. Inside, the mare shifted her weight, hooves scuffing against the straw. Her head lifted toward the light, nostrils flaring as she caught the smell of open air and earth untouched by ruin. She hesitated for a long moment, ears flicking at the unfamiliar sounds beyond, the soft chatter of volunteers, the distant whicker of another horse, the rhythmic splash of water being poured into troughs. Then, with a trembling exhale, she took her first step onto the ramp. The wood groaned, but the ground beneath was steady. When her hooves met grass for the first time, the dew clung to them like a quiet blessing. Behind her, the small goat bleated softly from the second trailer. Its eyes blinked against the light, adjusting to the brightness of morning after days spent in dimness. Mira lifted the latch and waited, letting the animal approach in its own time. It took 2 hesitant steps, then another, hooves making small imprints in the soft ground. The smell of fresh hay caught its attention, and soon it was nibbling clumsily, hunger overtaking fear. From the third trailer, the pig was carried carefully in a sling, its wound dressed, its body heavy but relaxed in the volunteer's arms. It was placed beneath a shelter where the air stayed cool and still. The hens came last, scattered gently into the yard, wings opening in short, uncertain flutters before settling into the dust to preen. Around them, the sanctuary moved with a rhythm that spoke of familiarity and care. Volunteers walked with unhurried steps, their hands steady, their voices kept low. Buckets of water clinked softly, brushes swept through tangled fur, and the smell of disinfectant mingled with the warm scent of animals waking to safety. No one commanded, no one hurried. Here, time had a different weight. It moved according to healing, not urgency. Mira stood near the fence, watching as the mare explored the edge of her new paddock. The horse's ears turned toward every sound, her muscles still taut beneath her skin. A volunteer approached with a bucket of feed, holding it just beyond reach, waiting until curiosity drew the mare closer. The grain rustled, a quiet invitation. The mare stretched her neck forward, lips brushing the rim, and began to eat. Each mouthful seemed to pull her further from the memory of what came before. The goat soon found its way to the fence, calling softly toward the mare as if recognizing her presence from the journey. The sound was small, but it carried across the air, and the mare lifted her head in response. The pig, resting beneath its shade, shifted slightly and released a deep sigh, a sound that spoke of exhaustion, but also of release. Nearby, the hens had discovered loose soil and were scratching methodically, their feathers catching the light like flecks of gold. By late afternoon, the sanctuary had taken on the quiet rhythm of peace. Water trickled from a hose into a trough, the steady sound blending with the rustle of straw and the low murmur of animals finding comfort. A few volunteers lingered near the fences, leaning on rails, their faces softened by the sight before them. One of them spoke under her breath, barely more than a whisper. "They're home now." The words lingered in the warm air, drifting out across the field. Mira didn't reply. She only nodded, her gaze following the mare as the animal lowered her head once more to graze. The wind rose gently, moving through the leaves and bending the tall grass in slow, graceful waves. It carried with it the quiet hum of life continuing, fragile, unhurried, real. And as the sun lowered behind the hills, the light spread wide across the sanctuary, touching every fence, every creature, every breath, as if the land itself had chosen to welcome them home. Morning unfolded softly across the sanctuary, the first light brushing the fields in strokes of gold. Dew hung thick on the blades of grass, bending them gently beneath its weight. From the stables and pens came the small sounds of waking life, the rustle of straw, the low hum of movement, the quiet rhythm of hooves shifting in the dirt. The air was cool, still touched by night, but it carried the calm pulse of safety. Here, time had loosened its grip, stretching into something slow, patient, and kind. The mare stood near the far fence, her coat catching the rising sun. The dullness that once covered her had been replaced by a soft sheen, each brushstroke of care leaving its mark. Her ribs no longer pressed sharply against her skin. Her body had begun to remember strength. When she lifted her head, the muscles moved easily, the stiffness of hunger replaced by quiet rhythm. She grazed steadily, pausing only to listen to the distant call of another horse, then lowered her head again, unbothered. Beside her, the goat bounded toward a trough, its hooves striking the earth with light, uncoordinated energy. It paused to drink, then sprang back, circling a patch of wildflowers that had begun to grow along the fence line. Its playfulness carried a clumsy joy, not forced, but natural, as if the body itself had rediscovered what freedom felt like. In the shade near the barn, the pig rested on its side, breathing evenly. The wound that had once darkened its leg was now a faint scar beneath new skin. Flies hovered nearby but did not linger. The air was too clean, too cared for. Occasionally, the pig shifted, the sound of its breath deep and content, a slow rhythm that matched the calm of the place. Not far away, the hens scratched at the ground, feathers fluffed against the morning breeze. They clucked softly to one another, not out of fear but habit, a language of small reassurance shared between them. Mira moved quietly among them, her boots brushing the damp grass. She carried a bucket of grain, setting it down beside the mare, who turned her head to look at her. For a moment, their eyes met, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two beings sharing space under the same rising sun. Mira reached forward, her hand resting gently against the mare's neck. The animal did not flinch this time. Her muscles stayed loose, her breathing calm. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but it carried the weight of weeks spent rebuilding trust one quiet gesture at a time. Around her, the sanctuary stirred to life. Volunteers moved through the paddocks, speaking softly to one another. Water filled buckets, hay was spread across the pens, and the faint sound of laughter drifted from somewhere near the feed shed. There was no rush, no sense of task to be finished, only the rhythm of care repeating itself, day after day, until it became part of the land's own heartbeat. The animals no longer watched the humans with wary eyes. They had learned that footsteps meant food, that voices meant calm, that hands, once feared, could bring comfort. Mira leaned against the fence and watched the sun rise fully over the pasture. The light struck the mare's mane and turned it to gold. The hens wandered near her boots, their feathers brushing her legs as they searched for insects in the grass. "They made it," she whispered, the words almost carried away by the wind. No one answered, but she didn't need one. The proof was all around her, in the soft thud of hooves against the earth, in the murmur of wings, in the deep quiet that had once meant abandonment but now meant peace. As the morning warmed, the animals drifted further into the fields. The fences stretched wide and open, but beyond them lay the wild, a world that still moved with danger and uncertainty. Here, within this haven, they had found something rarer than safety. They had found the space to begin again. The goat lay in the grass, the pig shifted deeper into the shade, and the mare lifted her head toward the wind as if greeting it. By midday, the sanctuary had settled into silence again, not the hollow kind that once filled the empty farm, but a living quiet, full of breath and movement and slow, steady life. And as the light spilled across the fields, the land seemed to breathe with them, a single shared exhale of peace beneath a sky that had seen both loss and renewal.